Hey out there, YouTube family, and welcome to another edition of the Kevin Strong Show. And in this video, we're going to talk about how the middle class is just fading away, the vanishment of the middle class. So let's get into this. This is a really important topic. I think most of us are feeling inflation from different aspects, whether it's your income's not keeping up with inflation, rising gas prices, food prices, you name it. It seems like the middle class is getting squeezed on both ends. So we're going to basically dive into an article that kind of talks about that in more detail. And it's going to be broken up into three categories. We're going to talk about the rich, the poor, the middle class, which is basically obviously almost extinct, and the bifurcation, which is a fancy word of saying a splitting of the classes, the have and the have nots. So without further ado, let's get into this content. And I'm going to share something with you at the end of this video. So please stick around. It's going to be very interesting because I did some research, very little, quite honestly. And it kind of gave me six ideas of what indicates whether or not you are middle class. And three of them aren't really a good indication. So please stay tuned to the end of the video if you want to get that information. I think it's very thought-provoking. So let's get into the article. And this basically talks about how inflation is taxation. And I've been saying that for the longest. It's a passive-aggressive way for the government to put a lot of stimulus into the economy. That kind of led to inflation. There is a very compelling argument on the other side of that. There's a very, very smart guy that has a channel called I think it's the Stephen Van Meter Show or something like that. And he makes a very cogent argument that says the supply chain is exacerbating inflationary pressure more so than all of the stimulus money. Now, that's open for debate, but I think if you listen to a couple of his videos, he does make a very, very valid point that the supply chain issue that's been plaguing us and the world for the last 2 years probably has a lot more to do with inflation than most people think. But without further ado, let's get into the news. Once again, we're going to talk about the poor, the rich, and the middle class. So let's jump into this article. They call it taxation without representation. Inflation is largely a monetary phenomenon. It is a direct result of the increase in in the money supply. However, it does not affect all of us equally. So this is something that I think it goes without saying. How you handle inflation has a lot to do with your income, your disposable income, your debt level, things of that nature. Do you have more assets than liabilities? As they say, assets feed you, liabilities eat you. So please understand that. So let's start off here with the rich. Okay, the rich invest in assets that rise faster than inflation, or at least that inflate at the same rate as the money supply. They put their money in the stock market, which is a leading indicator of the economy in general and inflation in particular. This is flawed on so many levels. I think most of us understand this, that the stock market is not a representation of Main Street. The stock market has done quite well the last 2 years, and the average American has not. Once again, you might be wondering, why did I bring this article up? Because some of it is good and some of it's not. I had an old pastor once tell me sometimes you have to just eat the meat and spit out the bones. So some of this is on point and some of this I disagree with. And those points where I disagree, I'll try to be as succinct as possible and point that out. Let's talk about the poor. The poor have nothing to invest in. They have no savings. They live hand to mouth. What earned is spent in the same month or the same day, which is especially true for casual labor. They don't get to watch their money lose value because they have no money. And that's kind of like an extreme position to take, but there's something to be said about that. If you have an emergency fund and then you find out that you have to get all of your front and back brakes replaced to include rotors, and they say, I don't know what it is, I'm not a mechanic. Let's say they say that's $1,000. Somebody who's living below their means, who have adequate reserve funds on the side, will be a little bit caught off guard by that and go, oh my goodness, okay, we'll fix it. The person who hasn't prepared for that emergency or hasn't put themselves in a position to have an emergency fund, when they get that unexpected front and back brake quote from the auto mechanic, they go, oh my God, I have to put this on a credit card or run down to the closest payday loan store and take an advancement out on my next check. just so I can keep my car running. So that's somebody, that second example is someone who's being reactive. And the first example is obviously being proactive. So let's go ahead and continue down here under the poor category. However, in a hyperinflationary environment, which I think we're close to, if not already in, wages are slow to adjust upwards in order to keep pace with inflation. I've talked about this in previous videos. I do not think the average wage increase is nearly keeping up with inflation. Now, the government purports that inflation is somewhere around 8.5 to 9%. There's a very reliable, really good company called Shadow Stats. If you go to shadowstats.com, they've got some really good information that takes into account the way they used to calculate the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, back in the 1970s. And based on their metrics, which I do hold as being accurate, they estimate that the annual inflation rate's probably somewhere between 15 and 20%. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. That is how the poor loses out. But there is a lower bound to poverty. Poverty. The lowest boundary is probably death by hunger and starvation. So at that point, we're talking about probably third world countries, right? Nothing, not to say it doesn't happen here in the US, but by and large, I think that's an extreme measure. Not to say that that's not coming, right? Who knows? So finally, the middle class has got some savings. They have some money balances. Some of their monies are saved in the bank. They also contribute to medical aid and pension funds, which are hammered by inflation. I did a whole nother video talking about the pension crisis in the United States. If you have not seen that video, please take a moment to view that, comment, and share. The middle class essentially pays the taxes. They are the anchor. They are the tax burden that basically covers the rich as well as the poor. The wealth that belongs to the middle class transferred to the rich. So working for someone would be an example of that. Not being able to write off a lot of expenses because you are a W-2 employee. These are some of the examples that fuel the statement that the middle class basically pay the majority of the taxes. And finally, what happens is what's called bifurcation, which is a separation between the haves and have-nots. The bifurcation of society is the end result. As the middle class gets crushed down to join the poor, the richer remain at the top. Society becomes too extreme, characterized by a small class of ultra wealthy elite, and the rest of the society is poor. Okay, that's probably where we're headed in the next 2 to 5 years. So if you've done any research online or seen any YouTube videos that says you'll own nothing and like it, they're talking about the bifurcation of society is the end result, where you have the have and have nots. A lot of folks out there are advocates of the Dave Ramsey method. That's okay if you're trying to get out of debt, but I'm here to tell you that system doesn't work. That's like dog pedaling in the middle of the ocean. It keeps you afloat for a while, but sooner or later you're going to drown. You're going to have to do something to come out of your comfort zone to reach land. You're going to have to do something to beat inflation. You can't just save your way out of inflation. It's almost hard or almost impossible to work your way out of inflation unless your work ethic deals with something with being self-employed, starting a side hustle, learning how to invest in the stock market. And I don't mean the traditional binary way that a stock market works for most people who invest in a 401k or 457 program, which basically means you only make money when it goes up and you lose money when it goes down. You need to be able to be flexible and learn how to trade the stock market and learn how to make money as the market's going down, when it's going up, and as it's going sideways, which is typically probably dealing with options. That's a lot more complicated in terms of basic investing, but it's definitely something you can understand and grasp if you spend the time. So let me get ready to wrap up this video. I did promise to give you some information about 6 signs. This was from Investopedia. These are 6 indications that you are middle class. The first one is home ownership. The second one is owning a car. Now, when they say owning a car, they mean having a car. They don't necessarily mean you not having a car payment. College education for your kids, retirement security, health care coverage, and family vacation. So here's what's interesting about that when I seen this list. 3 out of the 6 signs that indicate that you are middle class deal with debt. Home ownership, that's debt. It is a liability. It is not an asset. I'm not going to go into that. It's not. I'm not saying you can't make money on it, but anything that comes out of your pocket that you have to pay, technically, is considered a liability. A lot of people who are in the upper middle class bracket or rich will use passive income or use real estate and use some of the cash flow from that to pay for their primary residence. But strictly, if you're looking at it from an asset or liability standpoint, a house technically is a liability. Owning a car, unless you own it free and clear, most of us or some of us, I don't have a car note, but most of us will have a car note, and obviously that is a liability. That's just a maintenance problem waiting to happen. College education for kids. I didn't do any research on that particular topic, but I think I'm safe in saying that the majority of people who send their kids off to college, the kid's going to have to take on some kind of debt. I don't think the majority of people in America, when they get out of college, are debt free, and obviously that is true because we've got about $1.8 to $1.9 trillion of student loan debt, which is a very hot political topic. Healthcare coverage. Okay, I'll go ahead and give that a check. Family vacations. I don't know. I guess I'll go ahead and go with that. So I'll say the last 3: retirement security, healthcare coverage, and family vacation. But definitely home ownership, owning a car, and college education for kids. The first 3 are associated with debt. And that's why a lot of times people who follow that path find it very difficult to get to the next level. Most of us have been taught to just save your money, work hard, and then wait for retirement. That plan does not work. That is a recipe for financial disaster. So I hope you're enjoying this kind of content. Please comment and share because I care. And if you do enjoy this type of information, you want to get notification in the future when I come out with another video, please smash that like button. This was the Kevin Strong Show, and I'll see you guys in the next video.